10 minutes the first session, I would just let you share my whatever I know on the overview of the visual electrodiagnostic tests. And at the end, I will share with you a few cases to let you know, like in different clinical situations, which test to order when and why. So these are the different programs available in visual electrodiagnostic tests. There are certain programs which are pan-retinal or global programs. This includes electroretinogram, a full-field electroretinogram, but it's for the latest standard. Just electroretinogram implies it's a full-field electroretinogram. Electrooculogram, visually evoked potential, while the regional programs include pattern electroretinogram and multifocal ERG or MFERG. The extended protocols are also available that one can apply depending upon the need. This includes a SCONE protocol, photopic negative response, and so on. So this is how the setup looks like for a full field ERG or simply ERG. This is a Ganzfeld stimulator. Ganzfeld means full field stimulator, where to stimulate the entire retina with a bright flash of light. This is the subject. The pupils need to be dilated, and the recording is done with stimulus of different intensities with the base subject in different light and dark adaptation conditions. So we know that the photoreceptors, their activity reaches maximum in different adapting situations, as well as they at a particular wavelength. So this is utilized in segregating the responses in the retina, either cone or either inner retina or outer retina, and in the outer retina, whether the responses are from the rod photoreceptors or cone photoreceptors. So initially the subject, the pupils are well dilated, patient remains in a dark adapted condition. Then after that, the stimulus of low intensity, very low intensity, which is specific for the rod photoreceptors, are given, and the rod response starts, and slowly the stimulus strength is increased, and from dark adaptation the subject goes into a light adapted condition, and the cone photoreceptor systems are assessed. These are all different electrodes. So electrodes are used to capture the activity from generated within the eye. The electrodes can vary from skin electrodes to corneal electrodes. The corneal electrodes, again, contact lens electrode and non-contact lens electrode. So for example, this is the picture here shows contact lens electrode, where the response is very good. The activities, the electrical activity picked up is very good amplitude, but then it has that inconvenience of putting a contact lens on the cornea. The skin electrodes, on the other hand, are very good, very patient compatible, but the noises are more, and the active response is the wave amplitudes are a bit low. As you can see here, these are the am I audible?
You're audible, but there was some voice over.
Okay. There are
But we can hear you better now.
Okay. So this is how the setup in brief, like these are the electrodes, the junction box, the stimulator, which is called as a Ganzfeld stimulator, and the monitor. Now the the impulse that we gets processed, amplified, and finally displayed on the screen. The responses that come up, the The recording looks like this. So we have these recordings in the scotopic phase, followed by two important recording in the photopic phase. So this is the 0.01 scotopic ERG, initially used to be called as isolated rod response because this is dominated by the rod photoreceptors. So here the positive wave is called as B wave, and the A wave is very small, too small to be detected. And this is very specific for the rod bipolar cells. This is again followed by 30 scotopic ERG as a bright flash, with a brighter flash. So here slowly the cone contribution increases, and we have a wave and P wave. Am I audible? There are lots of background noises. Can I request all to mute their mic? Can you all hear me?
Yes, sir.
Can you all hear me?
We can hear
Yes,
you.
sir.
There are lots of background noises. Can I request all to
आपको दिखता है वो फास्टर तो फायदा नहीं होता
I would ask you to wait for a minute. We'll mute everybody and then we'll resume the presentation. Just for a minute. So I think now it is okay. Doctor, can you start your presentation again?
sounds better? There are no noises. So this is how the report looks like. The first one is, as I said, 0.01 scotopic ERG followed by 3.0 scotopic ERG with a brighter flash, and the cone contribution slowly increases. This is followed by 10 0 ERG. This is with a still brighter flash, and here the initial 8 millisecond is from the cone photoreceptors followed by rod photoreceptors followed by rod bipolar cells, then and also some amount of contribution from the cone bipolar cells. 10 0 ERG is same as 3 0 ERG but with a brighter flash. There is still someone speaking. So
we muted.
Yeah, so then this is a 10 0 bright flash ERG where we see the A wave more prominent than the 3 0 ERG. So this is predominantly the B wave is from the bipolar cells or inner retinal layers, and the A wave
Mute.
the initial part of the A wave is from the rod photoreceptors followed by bipolar cells with some cone contribution. Now the fourth program is oscillatory potential that is specific for the amacrine cells. Again, inner retinal layers, they are very small, minute wavelets, multiple series of wavelets. So these waveforms, the way to analyze them, whether they are present or not. While these scotopic waveforms, each wave we analyze them in terms of the amplitude and peak time. So the amplitude is, say for example, B wave amplitude is measured from the baseline up to their peak, and the time to peak is from the stimulus onset up to their peak. So every waves they are analyzed first whether they conform to the pattern expected or not. Say for example, in the scotopic 0.01 ERG, we should see a dome-shaped positive B wave like this. the 3-0 and 10-0, you should see a negative followed by a positive wave, as is shown here, and oscillatory potential series of wavelets. So when we are looking at this, we should see that whether the pattern is preserved or not. After that, individual comparison, like whether what is the amplitude and what is the peak time. This is followed by 2 recordings in the photopeak phase. This includes 3-0 photopeak and 30 hertz flicker response. And this is here during this recording, the rod photoreceptors, they get saturated, and the responses are predominantly from the cone bipolar cells and cone photoreceptors. 30 hertz flicker is more specific for the cone photoreceptors than the other programs available. While looking at a report, one should see what is the age of the patient, what is the pupillary dilatation, and the other details like which machine the test has been done, what is the type of electrodes, and what is the impedance level, whether the cooperation is good or not, are the tests reliable, is there any artifact. Finally, individual responses, amplitude and implicit time, then electrophysiologist remark in the electrophysiology language. Then these need to be correlated with the clinical finding. So I will go to the next program, that is electrooculogram. In the resting stage, there exists a potential across the retinal pigment epithelium base to apex. And this is the reason why the eyeball in a resting stage acts as a dipole, with the cornea being positive and retina negative. So it's a corneofundal potential, and this is positive anteriorly and negative posteriorly. This resting potential that changes with movement of the eyeball as well as the excursion of the eyeball during light and dark. So this has been exploited in the electrooculogram protocol. So whenever the eyeballs move within a fixed distance, say 30 degree from one side to other, and we put the electrodes to record the electrical activity, the sequence of change in electrical potential undergo a specific change. Like after 15 minutes of dark adaptation, the amplitude reaches its minimum, and around next after 10 minutes of light adaptation, it reaches a maximum. And this maximum is called as light peak, and the minimum is called as dark trough. This light peak to dark trough is called as Arden ratio and is used frequently in the electrooculogram. So this is how the pictorial representation of the eye is a dipole, and if we keep the electrodes at the medial and on the outer and inner canthi of the eye and the eyeball, when it moves, we get a series of waves, square waves like this. So a square top and a bottom. This is how the subject is tested. The electrodes, active electrodes are put on the either side of the eye, and the subject, there is a central fixation target as well as 2 more targets at 15 degree apart. So the eyeballs, they make rotatory movements to either of these fixation points, and this test is done 15 minutes in the dark and 15 minutes in the light, with some rest at every test. So though there is this test, both ERG and EOG, they are not dependent much on the vision. Even if you have poor vision also, you can get a reliable test. But EOG needs cooperation and at least some vision to look at the target. So this, if the subject is not cooperating and not moving the eyeballs, then the recording becomes erroneous. The 3 things that we need to see in case of EOG recording include the individual saccades. As I said, the waves should be square wave pattern and smooth. If we see waves like this, no, they are noises. And if you don't recognize it, there are so many noises. Say, for example, in this series of waves, there are 4, 5 noisy waves that the machine discards. Otherwise, no, there's any response doesn't mean that the EOG has a good response, and sometimes you can erroneously have a wrong information. Then the second is what is the dark light peak and the dark drop absolute value. And the if those peaks both in the dark as well as light, if they are plotted, normally they should be they should be like a sine wave pattern like this, and should slowly go down and reach its minimum around 10 to 15 minutes after the test, followed by again, once the light adaptation starts, they should reach a maximum around 10 to 12 minutes. So this peak and this trough recording should be, the ratio should be Arden ratio, and that we should see. Say, for example, here the lower one, the light rise is blunted compared to the upper one. This is the right eye, this is left eye. Visually evoked potential is an electrical response that is gathered from the occipital scalp over the occipital cortex in response to a bright flash of light, generating an electrical response within the visual system starting from the retina up to the visual cortex. So the ISEP, International Society of Clinical Electrophysiology of Vision, are a group of specialists who have recommended what all should be the standards and protocols for this, all the tests, so that they become interpretable, and the comparison becomes easy. The ISEP recommends basically 3 tests. One is on pattern visual stimuli called as flash visual evoked potential, or flash VEP, where a flash, bright flash of light is used, and pattern stimuli. And the pattern stimulus can be in the form of this can be in the form of pattern onset offset, or it can be pattern reversal VEP. The pattern reversal VEP is used most frequently because it shows it's very sensitive to the optic nerve pathology and shows very less variation from subject to subject. Here the stimulus is in the form of multiple checkboards, small checks, white and black, that alternates with time. And the check, depending upon the visual acuity, different check sizes can be used. And again, depending upon the check size, the response also varies, the amplitude and latency. So when we are comparing any data, any result, one need to compare the results with what expected for that laboratory and for that setup, which is called as normative data. And we have normative data. The laboratory need to need to generate the normative data for each test, say for ERG, EOG, multifocal ERG, pattern ERG, for a specific age range, for a specific type of recording protocol, contact lens, and the specific machine. We can't use, say, various normative data with Roland consult normative data. So these, depending on the check size, we get different responses. And for the different check size, the normative data also is available. Now the next one is pattern onset and offset. Here the pattern visual evoked potential, the subject has to have a good fixation. Unless the subject fixes well, you won't get a good response. Now sometimes those who are malingerers, they might deliberately not fix on the target and move forward. So in that cases, one need to do the test very fast. And this is what happens in stimulus onset and offset. So the stimulus is shown and immediately the stimulus disappears. So this type of stimuli are useful in checking for the diagnosing malingerers, and also useful for subjects who have nystagmus. Pattern visual evoked potential is the pattern VEP is the test of choice and is preferred over flash VEP whenever it is feasible. But there are certain situations, as I said, that if the optics is poor, media is hazy, or with the subject has poor vision to fixate on the target or the checker size, or very poor cooperation. In those cases, if one takes some information, then he can get those information from flash BEP. So flash BEP is useful in only in special situations, and in clinical practice, this is of less importance than pattern BEP. Flash BEP gives an idea, just the current is going through the visual system. That's all. So many times people use its amplitude and latency for uh, assessing various pathologies, but majority of us realize that flash BEP is very variable. Even the same subject, if you test twice, the pattern of the wave, the amplitude and latency can change. So wow, the information that we gather from a flash BEP is whether the visual system from the retina up to the visual cortex, some impulse is going or not. This is how the setup looks like. There are single channel and multi-channel protocols, but the ISEP recommendation is single channel midline electrodes. So this is how electrodes are placed. The active electrode is placed over the occipital cortex, overlying the visual cortex. And again, the ground and reference electrodes can be put on the frontal or the the head, the frontal region overlying the frontal cortex, and the either mastoid process or earlobe. And this is the stimulator. These are the junctional box. And after the brief flashes of light, the impulses are collected, amplified, and sufficient filtration is done. Compared to other tests, here the responses are mixed with the electrical activity and noises from the brain. As we are recording the activity over the scalp, it not only records the response generated by a stimulus, and the impulses that passes through the visual system, but also ongoing electrical activity that keeps on going in the brain, that is called as electro EEG. So the computer has to they have to filter out those responses from the true responses, which is time logged and comes after the visual stimulus. So then if you look at this is the example of what I said now. The subject here, the electrodes are in place. The pattern stimulus is shown, but the guy is not looking at the stimulus, but still you get some response. So even though the subject is not looking at the monitor, you get some response in the BEP, and any response in the BEP doesn't imply that the visual system is functioning. So to have, that is why this recording should be repeatable and reproducible. So when we do any electrodiagnostic tests, more so for BEP, this test to be repeated, and the reproducibility should be checked. If it is a false signal, so it is likely that the response won't be reproducible. But if it is reproducible, then you know that, okay, it's a true signal, and this can have some clinical meaning. This is how the waveforms look like. That is, the robust component is the P100. Usually the amplitude and latency is seen more often. While the flash BEP, we have N1 P1 and N2 P2. And the flash BEP, we just see for the reproducibility and difference between the two eyes. While pattern BEP, the P100 amplitude and latency can be affected in the various optic nerve disorders. For example, say demyelinating optic nerve disorders, the latency gets affected earlier than the amplitude, and the latency, the peak delay persists even after recovery for a long period of time. In contrast, ischemic optic neuropathy, the amplitude is affected more often than the latency. And this is the waveforms for the pattern reversal. Here the waveforms are just opposite. Now all till now we discussed on the electrodiagnostic tests used for pan-retinal or a global response. Now the ERG doesn't get affected unless more than 20% of the retina is damaged or dysfunctional. So focal retinal pathologies like a macular pathology, ERG can be normal, but still patient can have poor vision. So that is the reason why the focal ERGs are developed. Now pattern ERG is a mass response within a specific region. Say within the macular area, all the responses together are shown up as pattern ERG. Multifocal ERG shows a point-to-point response, topographic array of responses from the central 40 to 50 degree. So here we just see individual areas, how is the response. Pattern ERG reflect the ganglion cells at the macular area, and the important components include N35, P50 and N95. The P50, that is the positive wave after 50 millisecond, is the robust one and is used most frequently. And the second one is the negative N95 that happens around 95 millisecond after the stimulus onset. And the both P50 and N95 reflect the macular ganglion cells, while there is some amount of photoreceptor contribution also. So pattern ERG helps one to know whether the pathology is macular, along with whether the pathology is macular or not. And when combined with pattern VEP, it can say that whether the changes that we see in the pattern VEP is purely due to optic nerve disorder or a macular disorder that is showing up in the VEP. Because VEP can get affected even with the macular pathology or a panretinal pathology. So visual evoked potential always we interpret along with macular or retinal function. So pattern ERG is important to rule out a macular pathology or not, and also in localizing the pathology whether to purely to the optic nerve or to the macular ganglion cell or both. Multifocal ERG, depending upon the number of hexagons that we use, it can show a topographic array of responses, and it originates from the cone-driven bipolar cells and photoreceptor cells. So it's done in the light adapted condition. Again, needs subject cooperation and good visual acuity for fixation at the target. Now, as we know that the fovea is very sensitive, the hexagons, the stimuli are done in such a way that the central hexagons are smaller than the peripheral hexagons, so that we get a response where all the waves are of equal amplitude. We can see that the height of this wave is same as the center one. So it should be uniformly of equal height across the different regions that we analyze, either 61 or 103. Depending on if you increase the number of hexagons, you get a better resolution, but more noise. But if you reduce the number of hexagons, you have more noises, but the amplitude becomes bigger. So they can be used for though these individual waves, they more or less look like the cone-driven responses in the full-field ERG, but they are not same. Because here the responses are mathematically derived. Whatever response that comes, the system modifies it and depicts you. So this is the amplitude and latency are not a true response of the cells, but they show the functional activity of the cone photoreceptors in that area. That is why more than the absolute value, the change in the topographic array are important in the multifocal ERG. Suppose you have low amplitude waves from this region, you know that the pathology probably is related to the perifoveal area. So you say, suppose we have a wave which is stunted at the fovea but preserved at the periphery, then you know that probably the fovea is affected. Then there are different programs to compare also the superior hemiretina with the inferior retina and so on, inferior hemiretina. Finally, all these techniques need to be need to be adjusted with the age. For example, recording infants and neonates becomes difficult. So the up to 2 years of age, it is easy to forcibly hold the baby and record. But beyond 2 to 4 years or school going age, it becomes very difficult to examine, and one need to have change in the adjust his protocol to get an adequate recording. For example, here the with the skin electrodes, baby under general anesthesia, but the skin electrodes can also be done in the awake in an awake infant, as we can see here, and with a handheld instrument. This is again for 4 to 5 year old girl. You can or up to 10 years, they can easily be tested with from 4 to 10 years of age. They can be easily tested even with the contact lens electrode with the tabletop device. And this is again under general anesthesia. And these waves, amplitude and implicit time of all the electrodiagnostic tests, they undergo a lot of change during initial age and also later part of life. So usually by school going age, they become the adult level, like 3 to 4 years of age. So yeah, some waveforms, they start maturing after 6 months of life, some at 1 year of age. So a extinguished, if you see one extinguished response or flat response in a prematurely born baby, one may think that no, there is some pathology, but actually it is the response that has not matured is likely to mature with time. That is why all these tests, all the responses need to be analyzed with respect to the normative data for that age group, for that setup, for that type of testing condition, and has to be taken in context of clinical diagnosis. So I stay here. These are my references and suggestions for further reading. So we can, I would be happy to take any questions, or at the end of the session, we can take up the questions.
Thank you, sir, for the keynote. If there are any questions, we'll take it up at the end of the session. We move on to our second discussion by Dr. Mr. Sujoy Mukherjee, who's a consultant optometrist and head of optometry and retina diagnostics at LVPI Bhubaneswar. His basic research interest is electrodiagnostic, diabetic retinopathy, and retinal dystrophies. I request Mr. Mukherjee to enlighten the audience on techniques and interpretation on electrophysiology.
Okay, so very good evening to all of you, and the session that which is given a topic of electrophysiological techniques, test techniques as per the general guideline or the general ICEP protocol, and the interpretation format and how to carry forward the interpretation in such cases. So we do not have any financial interest for this. So before we start that, we have segregated the main objectives of the today's talk. The first is how do we approach for the appropriate electrophysiological test, and some of the ICEP guidelines. I will talk about the ICEP in detail in my subsequent slide. And at the end, the interpretation strategy or the test format. So it was already discussed in the previous talk, and it is just at a glance look for your further reference. So it is a summary of the test response. So ICEP is the conception behind ICEP is very crucial, and that says that consistency in which all recordings are made and the comparison between the all recordings in every laboratory, and that is what your ICEP is meant for. And ICEP is nothing but but an abridged form of International Society for Clinical Electrophysiology of Vision. So this is overall instrument setup in electrodiagnostic lab. There are some instruments which are tabletop. Most of those are tabletop, but one which is at our right hand bottom corner, which is a handheld device, which can also be carried out if patient is vulnerable or in pediatric population. So now, mostly done electroretinograms are full-field flash ERG and multifocal ERG. So let's go to the ICEP protocol then. So full-field flash ERG gives the overall gross response or the overall average response. So it is pretty important if we are looking for something which is having a dysfunction throughout the all over the retinal surface. Now, while we record any electrophysiological or electrodiagnostic test, we need electrodes. So we need a special type of electrode. So those special types are formatted here. So this is a type of a contact lens electrode. These two are the contact electrode, and the rest all which are at the bottom row, these all are the skin electrodes. So we must need a special type of electrodes in order to record electrodiagnostic test. So this was already being discussed by Dr. Tapas in the previous talk. So once we start a electroretinogram, we need to give a proper adaptation. But most important point here, what we need to look during the test, that is signal to noise ratio, which is written here in the highlighted bold red mark. That is less than 5 kilo ohm is expected. So the instrument may not be capable to show you the signal to noise ratio, but during the test, if you look at the impedance level, that gives you an idea what the signal to noise ratio should be. If it is high, so that must be a lot of artifacts which are generally populating the response that we are receiving. And this is the different position and electrode placements and ideal patient preparation with the help of various electrodes. And starting from the pediatric population till the geriatric age group, there are a lot of electrodes which can be used to soothe the patient and for the easiness of the purpose. And the patient setup is also framed here. Now, classic recordings look like this, which is shown in front of your slide. Now, I will take you through the recordings which we have taken. But the basic understanding that we have to have before we leave this slide, that is scotopic and photopic. So scotopic, that means one which is in a state of dark adapted, and photopic, the state in a light adapted situation. Now, here, this is the recordings. These are the recordings which are taken in a scotopic condition. So important point here is the scotopic 0.01, 3 point, and scotopic 10 point. These all are the protocol names during a phase. Now, one should understand why these all are and what is the meaning of this. First, the intensity of light is very minimal. Then we are moderately intensifying the light, and here we have intensified the light almost more than double or triplet than the 3.0 ERG. And the scotopic 3.0 OPS is nothing but the oscillatory potential, which highlights the wavelets on B wave studied in detail using different filter setting. So it does not carry any A wave or B wave. We do not have to measure. We have to just see whether this is present or absent. Same thing, but in another setup which we need to do, that is in a photopic setup, that is photopic 3 point and photopic 3 point flicker. These all which Dr. Tapas suggested in the previous talk, that photopic 3 point is a single cone response and 3.0 flicker is a 30 hertz flicker. So response running average curve looks like this, and simultaneously in these two graphical formulations, one tabular formation pops out here, which determines the amplitude as well as the implicit time of the current recording. Now, while we give this entire report to the patient, or if we upload this on our server, the actual response of the full-field flash ERG looks like this, which is in front of you at present. Now, multifocal ERG it is the light adapted cone system. It is a focal response. It gives us that Dr. Tapas told in the previous talk. It is cone induced bipolar cell function. So placement of electrode is pretty similar as a flash ERG. So as we have discussed in the previous talk on full-field electroretinogram, here also you should keep in mind at the level of signal to noise ratio as well as the impedance level, which is highlighted here. So simultaneously patient should at least avoid any intense light test, just like fundoscopy, FFA, OCT. So before, if it is done, then patient should be adapted in a natural light for next half an hour or 1 hour approximately before we process the test of multifocal ERG. Now, the stimulus pattern during the test, which comes in front of the patient, is shown here. So there are a lot of hexagon patterns based on what is suitable for the patient, the person who is trying to run the test. Based on the perception of him or her, we can process the test of multifocal ERG. Now, MFERG records that I told that is the total retinal response, and thereby size of the waveforms are pretty small. This can be mapped on the fundus photo also, and keep in mind the field of view and the retina view. So here we have two photo images. One is the field view and one is the retina view. Field view is vertically opposite. If we are noting down some reduced amplitudes or some kind of findings at the bottom of the multifocal ERG trace arrays, that means ideally it should be in the upper arcade of the particular surface of retina. Now, in the retinal view, we just superimpose that trace arrays or the response which are getting extracted over the fundus photo. So we should always be alert while we see these two type of views. One is the field, another one is the retina. Now, 3D plot shows the overall signal strength per unit area of retina. Now, here, while we have trace arrays of multifocal ERG, first we have to look at the level of noise or the signal to noise ratio or the impedance level. So it is expected that it should be less than 2. Here, what we can see, it is 1.3 microvolts. So if it is less than 2, that means the range is expected, and along with that, we should also look at the graph which is being traced here. So that graph shows that movement of the ocular surface or movement of the cornea throughout the test. As the electrode is being placed properly, and if the person moves the eyes thoroughly, consecutively throughout the test, so that test response will be completely unreliable, because that test is solely dependent on the attentiveness of the patient, or how attentively patient can look at the target. And the field view of the visual field view here also is pretty important. That scale, you must look at it, because it is determining how much amplitude it could be. Because previously I explained that the amplitudes which are getting extracted during multifocal ERG, it is pretty small. Now, it looks almost same like the waveform which is seen during flash electroretinogram. Now, while we look at the entire graphs of the multifocal ERG of a particular eye, we should also be little alert on the scales that which we are looking at. So this is the overall average of the response. Next is the noise to the signal level. So black is the noise and the colored versions of the signal, which indicates that more amount of signals are getting populated here rather than the noise level. And individual N1, P1 and N2 wave responses are also averaged at the bottom side. Now, there are some things which are to be watched out. That is the pupillary dilation, refractive error, whether the patient is having during the test, whether patient is inducing blinks related artifacts or electrode related artifacts, and how is the optical media. Because if the media is pretty hazy, patient cannot attentively look at the target, then that time multifocal ERG or any pattern program would be very hard. So that time flash protocol would be helpful. So there are such type of numerous points which are to be remembered during while we perform ERG related protocols. Now, test indication of EOG is usually done while our ERG comes out to be normal. Now, here also impedance level of the signal to noise ratio should be less than 5 kilo ohm, and patient should be fully dilated, and patient must have a good saccades, good control over the saccades. So that means, which means the electrodes are placed in this manner. So this area, starting from this area is positive, negative, and again positive and negative, and the ground can be placed at the level of forehead. Now, these are the GIF cartoons that shows that during the test how the patient should continue the ocular movements to target the particular stimulus pattern which is in front of the patient's eye. And this dark followed by light adapted stage that shows the target is moving and patient has to look at that target thoroughly. And based on these saccadic patterns, the saccadic movements are getting created. So during the test, throughout the test, it is not necessary that patient should continue looking at the target throughout the test. Machine will give the patient some rest to relax, so that would ease the test protocol at the end. Now, once the test is completed, there are two phases that I explained previously: dark phase followed by the light phase. So the minimum response in the dark is known as dark trough, and a maximum response which is found in the light adapted stage is known as a light peak. So the probable time range is also giving here. So within 10 to 15 minutes, starting from the initiation, within 10 to 15 minutes, dark trough should be created and light peak should be created 7 to 12 minutes after initiation of the light adapted phase. So the ratio between light phase by the dark trough is known as Arden ratio, and which is something we want to see at the end of electrooculogram. And the average normal range is approximately 1.7 to 4.3. This is the running average curve. X-axis shows the time in a minute, and y-axis shows the amplitude in microvolts. And at the end, we have to calculate this dark trough and light peak to calculate the Arden ratio. And just a minute. Yes, sorry. And these are the saccadic moves in right as well as in the left eye that I have told that patient must have a good control over the saccadic moves throughout the test. Now, patient should understand in his or her own native language to what to do, what not to do. That understanding has to be conveyed to the patient. Media must be clear in order to localize the target and follow the target throughout. And patient should have a good saccadic movements rather than having nystagmus, or if the visual acuity is pretty poor, cannot look at the target carefully. That time also saccadic movement could be involved and can be hampered. Now, visual potential is also commonly done test, which we frequently do. That is the single channel VEP, which aims to show us the functional integrity at the level of pre-chiasma, which is very important to idealize the case of a malingering. And post-chiasmatic pathway can be well understood with the help of multi-channel VEP. Now, during VEP, there are two protocols. One is flash VEP, one is pattern VEP. So pattern is something which is completely dependent on the visual acuity. If patient can target the stimulus pattern, so that time your pattern VEP would be helpful. But in such cases, like if the pupil is dilated or patient cannot be attentive to look at the target, the test response could be affected. So patient should be attentive throughout the test. And we must follow a guideline as per the ICEF. We must follow a guideline of 10-20 system. So we must put the positive electrode here at the level of inion, almost 1 centimeter from the inion, and 20%, that means 2 centimeter from the level of Nasion could be the placement of our negative electrode. Ground can be placed anywhere. What we do, we usually place the ground electrode at the earlobe. So the previous talk that we have seen that why the flash VEP would be helpful, and the normal response looks like this. And the running average curve of the pattern VEP, that a pattern check reversal VEP is giving here, and the stimulus pattern during the test of pattern VEP is also clipped at the upper side. Similarly, pattern onset offset VEP, the check response pattern, stimulus pattern is shown here. What is important here? Is we must follow the P100 waveform. We have to choose the P100 waveform in order to measure the amplitude as well as implicit time, because it is the one of the most consistent responses which we found during the test. So as I told, that pupillary dilation is pretty important. If pupillary dilation is present and patient is advised for a pattern VEP, we may not have any clue why the response is decreased or why the amplitude is so less. It could be because of the pathology or the feature which a patient is having, or else it could even be possible because of the dilated pupil, patient's crispy vision would not be maintained, and because of that blurred image which is getting formed over the level of retina, and attentiveness would also go down. We must give a full refractive correction if we are aiming to perform pattern VEP. But flash VEP, we just want to see whether the response is going to the brain, or the eye to brain coordination is maintained, or that integration is hampered or getting deviated. So that time pupil dilation or the visual acuity is not much important. At the end, what we have to know is test repeatability and reproducibility. So whenever we perform a VEP, flash or pattern, whatever it is, we must have to repeat the test. And if we see that repetition is reproducible, that means the test is successful. Otherwise, we have to do the test further in order to understand whether that response which we have seen in the previous shot, how that response is once we are repeating it. Yes. Suppose let's consider we have performed one multifocal ERG. So first, what we have to see the electrode induced response, whether whether the test consists of more amount of signal to noise ratio, or the impedance level is within the normal range. Now, whether patient related complaints, whether patient blinked a lot of times during the test, or the patient made the pure steadiness during the test. And the scale analysis, whether the test is deviated or inducing slope induced artifacts, or the X and Y both are having a good reasonable response. And last but the most of the important points, that is whether the system is calibrated. System needs the calibration yearly. So if that system is not at all calibrated, or if you feel that responses or the intensity levels are little deviated from the normal range, so we must contact the company engineers in order to calibrate the system. Now it is the first format that shows the demographic details along with the best corrected visual acuity, and the corrected refraction should also be implemented in front of both the eyes. During the while we perform one eye test, we have to give the proper correction. Now, this is also a summary that what type of test we have performed, how was the pupillary dilation, which system we have used, when was the system last calibrated, what type of protocol we have chosen, and what could be the electrode induced impedance level. Now, once these all are done, then we have completely summarized and merged these two formats. That is the starting from the beginning demographic details, best corrected visual acuity, and the ancillary details of the calibration and other stuffs. We can club these all together. And we should consider the normal response. Considering this is a normal response, suppose we have found this during the collection of the data of normative population, among the normative population. Now it is the normative data, and this is the normative recordings or the normative values of that particular patient. Now, once we have conducted the test on a patient who is having some pathology or some other findings, but just by looking at the response, we can understand that response is not up to the mark, or it is not a similar response of the response that we have just seen. It is not like that much of high amount of amplitude, not carrying that amount of highest amplitudes. But we should follow an artistic approach. That artistic approach means after following the details of the noise and other averages which are shown, average response, average particular response of the noise level, how is the response and how is the level of noise, and average response of N1, P1 and N2. So once these all are done, so keeping in mind with the normative values and how is the patient values, so we can definitely tell that these values are not fulfilling the criteria of these values. So these all are reduced. So at the end, we can justify that response which we have taken from the patient who is having some pathology or some findings. So all the amplitudes are outside normal range, despite the implicit time is within normal limit. So with this, this brings me to end of the talk, and I am going to leave you with a checklist which gives you all the take-home messages that you need to get out of the talk. Thank you all. And this is a summary of the details that we have told, we have explained, and we have learned from this talk. Thank you all. Any further question or any clarification?
Yes, we do have a couple of questions that have come up. Can ERG be done after fundus fluorescence angiography or a fundus photo?
If ERG is aimed, and if fundus angiography or the fundus evaluation is already being done, then patient must be waited for dark adaptation for approximately 1.5 to 2 hours, because of the intense light. So the photoreceptors will already be bleached. So patient should at least should be within the dark adapted condition for next 2 hours or so.
And another one, is VAP useful in macular disorders? So we were not able to hear you earlier. Now we can hear you.
So usually, as Sujay said, any examination with bright light should be avoided at least 1 to 2 hours before before ERG test. So in case like you have already done fluorescent angiogram or bright light examination, then one need to put the patient for a prolonged dark adaptation, as you said, or start up with your photopic phase first. Like you after the patient comes to a normal light condition, start up with your photopic phase followed by dark. Say for example, sometimes I suppose in babies when I do previously I used to do ERG under general anesthesia. So sometimes what happens, by the time I reach the refractionist have come and done a refraction, and someone has already seen the fundus, and fundoscopy have been done. So then on babies under GA to wait for again for a long period of the dark adaptation, what I do, I start off with photopic phase first. That get least affected compared to the scotopic phase after pre-test bright light examination, then followed by scotopic examination. Now to answer the VEP, is VEP useful for macular diseases? So I would say that it is mostly it is not required. Now these are all we need to know, that like X-ray, these are all tests, and they many a times they don't give you pathognomonic diagnosis, pathognomonic report like, no, this is there, this has to be diagnosis, has to be like this, except in few conditions. So most of the time they contribute to the diagnosis that we make after clinical examination and other evaluation. Macular diseases, we have many other tests, like starting from just visual acuity, say second photo stress test. I'm going from very simple tests that we usually forget: color vision, autofluorescence, OCT. So these are all, and the visual field, these are all non-invasive tests, and most of the time they give us enough information on the macular pathology and more information than the VEP. Then if these tests are not conclusive, then the test that I would address the next would be multifocal or pattern ERG in combination with a full field ERG rather than VEP.
Yes, sir.
Is there any other question? I think there is a question on ERG on assessing the ischemic, differentiating ischemic and non-ischemic CRBO. I put my like suggest my opinion in the chat box. They're very useful. So actually the B wave and two things, the B wave, the oscillatory potential, and the, so I said that the difference, the diagnosing inner retinal ischemia, I find ERG very useful. So from ischemic, non-ischemic to ischemic conversion, and also the B wave, the electronegative B wave, the second, the oscillatory potential, third, the latency, the peak time delay of the flicker waves. That is the 30 hertz flicker. We saw that they are uniform, there are multiple uniform peaks, so they become very sloppy, that the peak time delay is there. Then oscillatory potentials, they disappear. The B wave gets stunted, sometimes so severely that there is no rise above the baseline. It's called as electronegative B wave. They are very much suggestive of inner retinal ischemia, like cases like ischemic CRVO and CRAO or ocular ischemia.
Thank you, Dr. Tapas. So while we just show you some glimpses of the inauguration program today. This was inaugurated by the city magistrate of Moradabad, the unveiling of the plaque, which acknowledges the contribution of Seeing is Believing project, and our very own Dr. Pradeep and our trustees, explaining to them, the dignitaries, about the importance of the machinery. So I'm happy to share with all of you that this is perhaps the first time that these services are being provided in western part of Uttar Pradesh. And a lot of people from LVP have been trained and they're thus at our institute for this machine. So I would now ask Dr. Amishi to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Tapas. That would be Agniv. And Agniv can start sharing his screen while Madam is introducing him.
Yeah, so we move on to our next topic, which is going to be delivered by Mr. Agnev Datta, who did his comprehensive optometry fellowship from LVP Bhubaneswar, and is now here with us at our institute. He is actively involved in teaching, and his interest lies in the retina diagnostics. He will be talking to us on artifacts of ocular electrodiagnostics. Over to you, Mr. Datta.
Okay, so I am audible. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah. So
Yes.
first of all, thank you for giving me this opportunity to present in this webinar. So today I am going to present, discuss about artifacts in electrophysiology and its possible troubleshooting. So first at all, we should know that what is an artifact in electrophysiology. In medical electrophysiology, artifacts are abnormal signals that originate from some source other than the electrophysiological structure being studied. So study of neural response to electrical stimulus are often complicated by the presence of noise in recorded signals. No effects of artifacts. So there's severe effects of artifacts are there. There's any artifact in electrophysiology may obscure, distorted, or completely misinterpret by underlying neural responses. Sometimes it is very difficult to understand the actual signals due to artifacts. It is very important to differentiate artifacts or noise from study of neural responses, so we will not miss any underlying abnormality due to wrong interpretation of any report. Now I will show some example of different types of artifacts in different type of electrophysiological reports. Here in the first report, it is showing a normal scotopic ERG. Normal scotopic ERG. This first one is isolated rod response, and second one is maximum combined of scotopic. So here we can see the normal A wave and normal negative A wave and positive V wave. But in second report, both of the response are reduced along with very noisy response, very noisy waves here. So this report is we can't consider for evaluate the patient's eyes condition. Here, the first one is showing normal scotopic ERG of single cone response, and second one is 30 Hz flicker. Here it is the normal. We can see this negative and positive waves as well, but in the second one. Contains significant level of artifacts, so we can't understand the actual response from rods, from cones and inner retina. So we should repeat this test again in this condition. It is the pattern VEP of both eyes. Right eye is showing normal wave response of here N75 and P100 response, but in left eye, even it is extinguished response from the patient, but still N75 and P100 response are calculated by that system. So we system, due to this calculation happened due to artifacts in this artifacts or noise in this system in this response. So we should be assured that interpretation and report based on data given by system is correct, and we need to see this waveform also along with this. So here this one is showing a normal EOG curve where we can see this dark throw and light peak and this normal ardence ratio. But in other response, in other report, this noisy ERG curve is very noisy and it's not maintaining its own shape. So, but even we can see that ardence is normal ardence ratio, but we can't consider this ardence ratio for evaluation of patient's ocular condition. here the first one is the normal multifocal ERG report that's showing normal recording of a healthy control, where the 3D plots is corresponding with the track eddies. So this one is track eddies. So we can see here this A wave, B wave, and this one as per ERG, and this maximum signal is there at foveal area. But in other image, other report, this due to eccentric fixation of patient, this foveal response is that maximum response is coming downwards to fovea. So it is not corresponding as fovea. So patient fixation is also very urgent thing, and it's we need to see this one also very carefully to get a normal report. So even I have shown a few specific example of artifacts, but it may occur in any form in all test protocols, and we need to differentiate that from response from actual renal response. So we will not miss any underlying defect. So now I am coming to root cause. There is severe cause that may happen that artifacts. So artifacts may induced by several causes, the internal cause or patient-induced cause. If we put the electrode improperly, not properly, so electrode placement should be proper in area of skin or cornea. And we should not reverse the electrode, like we should not put negative instead of positive electrode, positive instead of negative. So in that case we will get totally reverse response, and we have to see that we should not place two electrodes very closely so they touch each other, so it will also give a severe artifact. So we should keep some distance between two electrodes. A poor electrode contact due to a dusty skin, or due to poor impedance, so poor electrode contacts due to dusty skin or insufficient conductive gel, and that will cause of poor impedance. So impedance actually refer to the contact of electrode to ocular surface or skin. So in all types of electrophysiological tests, the impedance should be less than 5 kilo ohm. So we can see here it is showing that impedance level. So it is here that 4.7 kilo ohm and 4.7. So it should be less than 5. After that, we should proceed this test. Now, patient's eye movement is also a very important cause for any artifact, any kind of artifact. Now, if this patient's view of Ganzfeld or stimulation or screen is blocked by any occluder of other eye or by his own eyelid, so that will also create any noisy response or reduced response. Blink artifacts blink artifacts is come when during blinking in between test procedure. So ask patient to look steadily as much as possible. Photomyoclonic reflex or muscular reaction due to high flash. So when patients when we give a high flash to patient's eye, there is certain muscular reactions producing during the test. So that's also include inside this test response. And finally, patient should be cooperative for a standard electrophysiological test. So external cause or machine related causes are like poor electrode quality. We should not use any kind of electrode after its expired date, or if the that metallic coat of electrode get fade or get destroyed. So even after that, if you use that electrode, we will get severe noise in that case. That poor connection with amplifier, we have an amplifier with that machine, and where we should connect that electrode. So if this there is less connection in that amplifier is there, so we'll get noise. So that thing also we can check with the impedance level. Improper stimulation strength, or if the calibration of stimulation strength is not not proper, or if it is stimulation is less or more, so that response may be overestimated or underestimated. Any kind of other electromagnetic device like mobile or ECG machine is present and active near the electrophysiology lab during the test time, it will create severe noise. It can create severe noise. And lastly, that earthing or voltage issue with proper power supply should be checked. So any voltage issue in the voltage is not proper, or if there is an earthing issue, so earthing or ground issue, so we'll get some artifacts or noise from this. So troubleshooting or solution for this artifacts, we should follow the standard protocol. Standard protocol or guidelines for examination, like proper dark or light adaptation or appropriate pupils dilation, etc. etc. So it is very important to differentiate artifacts from other neural response or any abnormality. So proper placement of electrode should be implanted. Ganzfin stimulation should be calibrated. So we should not use mobile or any other electromagnetic device near lab, as per I discussed. Band pass filter or algorithm based rejection are actually implanted inside machine to remove some particular artifact that's known by that machine or system, and patient cooperation should be there, and we should check that electric connectivity properly. Thank you. So is there any question, other question?
Thank you, Mr. Datta. Now we go back to Dr. Tapas sir for the last session of this webinar as to which test to order and when. Over to you, Dr. Padi.
Am I audible now?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, is the screen visible?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Yeah, so I hope the Zoom session is not going to get over. How much time we have?
No, sir. It's not going to get over, sir. You can...
Okay, so maybe I'll just take you through a few prototype tests. So I will stress here now. These whatever tests now we discussed, all these things are, majority of them are not pathognomonic except few. So these all add to our clinical information that we gather by spending time with the patient, going through the history, then examining the patient in detail, then narrowing down. Now these two, history and examination, now generous questions which we are going to, the questions that we need to answer. Say, for example, this patient has come, he's complained how it has happened, all these things. By doing this, I have thought of few conditions, the 4-5 conditions. Now, after looking at the fundus, now out of these 4-5 condition, it further narrows down to 2 to 3. Then after that few, if we have to order few tests, I would try to first order those who are quick, available in the fingertip, quickly you can do. That includes, as we say, RAPD, color vision, autofluorescence, OCT, fundus photo. These tests don't require extensive time or no, that much of stress. Now, doing after all these tests, now the question further narrows down. Now, these questions, now the unanswered questions decides which test to order when. So before ordering for any test, these non-invasive quick tests and detailed examination need to be done. These tests definitely helps us in confirming our diagnosis. Sometimes there are situations where we are not sure about what is the diagnosis, that is unexplained visual loss. They give us a diagnosis. Sometimes prognosis, what is going to happen. Say, for example, you have a congenital stationary night blindness. You can tell that no, it is not going to progress, worsen over time. It rather with time the adjustment will be better and the subject is going to do a bit better with time compared to another class of progressive disease like retinitis pigmentosa, which is going to worsen day by day. Monitoring cases of vitamin A deficiency. Now you administer vitamin A, there is marked improvement in the ERG, and that can monitor how it is progressing. Or say autoimmune retinopathy, we have started the systemic steroid and you see the responses coming back. Ischemic status we discussed, they are a very good tool, a non-invasive tool. Differentiating between optic macular and optic nerve, not isolated macular pathology, but you have a case where is very subtle disc pallor, subtle RAPD. You are not sure whether it is optic nerve or macular pathology. The disease is neither at one end, neither the macular nor the optic nerve. The symptom, sign, appearance are a bit confusing. Whether the macular pathology that has caused retrograde degeneration of the optic nerve and caused disc pallor, or the optic disc pathology that has caused the degeneration of the ganglion cell and appearing like a macular pathology. So here we have both, like pattern ERG and pattern VEP together can tell you that fix you. Probably we are dealing with either a macular pathology alone or a optic nerve pathology alone, or both. Drug related retina toxicity, those drugs that affect parafoveal area, like say for example hydroxychloroquine or sometimes tamoxifen, those that don't affect the center. So the focal programs in the ERG, they help us in early detection of the drug toxicity, and timely discontinuation of the drug can help one prevent landing up in irreversible visual loss. Research, of course, one need to, in any cases of functional, structural and functional assessment of the retina, they play an important role. Go to the next slide. Now, nyctalopic disorders. Say, for example, a patient comes with the nyctalopia. So, you first, the question is, as I said, the history, the clinical examination. Is it a true nyctalopia? So, anyone who has poor vision, say high minus power, say 20/40 vision, obviously in a dim light lit situation, he will be more affected than compared to another one who has 20/20 vision. So that is not nyctalopia. Now the person who is it is unnecessary to load them with all the tests like VEP, ERG, whatever we know, is not required. So the nyctalopia is true nyctalopia is one when a subject, when it goes to a darkly adapted room, he or she will be totally, he very fearful to move from his place, to such an extent that his or her night activities will stop. Like they will be, these are the true nyctalopia. And then the question is, can it be treated? Probable course and prognosis, possible effect on the other family members. So This is a case of 43-year-old lady, nyctalopia, progressive from childhood, and classical bilaterally symmetrical appearance, and blotches of pigments, arterial attenuation, photoreceptor loss at the periphery, advanced field loss, almost retinitis pigmentosa, just spot diagnosis. So here ERG doesn't give you anything extra. You know that looking at this picture, you know that ERG is going to be extinguished only. So maybe at the baseline, for the confirmation, one need to do this ERG, but there is no need to repeat them in every visit unless one is doing a research or sudden change in the visual behavior. One should do, otherwise baseline is enough. But here, you see, this is a 11-year-old male with 6/9 vision with -5 diopter sphere, and had a vision of 6/9, and this guy was not bothered much about the nyctalopia, but had some amount of difficulty at the night. Fundus looks normal. What next? So these are the case. Probably first once we confirm that it is really a nyctalopia, then the test of choice would be the next the test that targets the rod photoreceptors, and that would be ERG. Of course, before that, I would like to see the color vision, the pupillary reaction, OCT, and all these things are going to be normal only. HBA, autofluorescence, OCT, all these things will be going to be normal. Then the investigation of choice is ERG, because we are looking at the rod photoreceptors. And as we can see here, this is the extinguished scotopic responses. You see, normally it should come like a B wave, should come like this. And the B wave is not rising. Normally it's the A wave. In the dark adapted 3-0, it should go up. So this is classical of congenital stationary night blindness. And diagnosis is important because they are non-progressive, and in fact, they become better. This is again a case of fundus albipunctatus, and the diagnosis, the investigation that differentiates is the ERG, electronegative B wave, and these patients either remain stationary or a bit better with time compared to retinitis puncta albicans, which is a progressive disease. See this. Case refers to the question put in the chat box about enhanced S-cone syndrome. This is a picture, both the eyes. This 15-year-old male had nyctalopia. Vision was 20/20/30. Now we have nummular pattern of RP changes around the optic disc and the arcade. Had nyctalopia. Now what test? Of course, again, same autofluorescence, OCT, you see few intraretinal cystic spaces, and it is not progressive. Now, if we arterial caliber normal, what else? This is the ERG. ERG, you see, there are now reduced scotopic responses. The photopic responses more or less normal. It is not conclusive of retinitis pigmentosa. But if you look at this ERG carefully, we see that the photopic B wave is supernormal, and the photopic B wave here more or less look like this scotopic B wave. It's a broad and a supernormal, and this gives a clue that probably we are dealing with something it is called as enhanced S-cone syndrome, and one should do a enhanced S-cone protocol. And as per this an amber or orange background with a blue flash, you see that there is a supernormal S-cone response, and normally S-cone contribute to 10 to 15% of the total cone population. But in this disease, the L and M cone go down, and S-cone populate to such an extent that they also some areas of rods also get they degenerated. So as a result, you see the rod response also getting affected, and supernormal S-cone syndrome. They present with nyctalopia, but usually the course is better, more or less stationary, and overall response is good. This is a 11-year-old girl. You see, she is not symptomatic. But any, small children, you never know, they might not be telling you well about their symptom, but the mother and father, they noticed that, they said that, no, she doesn't have any difficulty at night. But the referring ophthalmologist has referred the child as a case of retinitis pigmentosa. Looking at the picture, arterial caliber is normal. There is salt and pepper mottling. And here, OCT, you see, there are intact photoreceptors. From this information, we know that this is not a case of retinitis pigmentosa. Extra test is not required. But as it is, the case has been referred from an ophthalmologist, we need an objective evidence, and that's what we did. ERG, this is full field ERG. Upper one is the upper one is for the right, both the eyes, the right eye and left eye, the right hand side and the right hand, and the left eye. This is done with retrieval handheld device, and you can see that the pattern is well preserved, and the ERG is more or less normal. We need to know that the test is done with the handheld device with skin electrodes, so the amplitude is not likely to be that big, that high as we do it with Burian Allen contact lens electrode. But the pattern is preserved, so it is not RP. Likely rubella retinopathy, the salt and pepper retinopathy, it usually doesn't affect ERG, and the prognosis is good. 37-year-old male, sudden nyctalopia, late onset nyctalopia. Previously, everything was fine, and gross loss of vision in one eye, and we associated with photopsia, some amount of like photoglare also. All the investigations are normal except few RPE changes here, and OCT changes shows photoreceptor loss at the periphery. So what it can be? Is it a late onset RP? But such a sudden onset we never see. So ERG, if we do, we can see that no, the extinguished scotopic responses and grossly reduced photopic responses. So whenever we see a normal or near normal fundus and a patient presenting with photopsia, field constriction or complaining of photopsia in addition to scotopic response, rule out azure or autoimmune retinopathy, and ERG plays an important role to rule out photoreceptor dysfunction. 12-year-old male, photoaversion, progressive reduction in vision, bilaterally symmetrical, more or less round hypopigmented patch at the macula. The mostly you know that, and photoaversion, it's a cone dystrophy. Now the corroborative finding would be defective color vision, like few plates the boy would be able to read. OCT would show photoreceptor loss. More or less it is cone dystrophy is confirmed, but to confirm it further, one can do ERG, and we can see that selective affection of the photopic response. But always it might not be so. You have cases like this, say 23-year-old male, 612 vision, minus 2.5 diopter sphere in right eye and minus 3 left eye, was diagnosed as amblyopia OU. But no one questioned why this guy had severe photoaversion, much more than the case that we discussed, to the extent that the moment the patient comes inside, you see that he was closing the eyes. Too much extensive photoaversion. So now why does it happen? Then our target would be next, after the quick test like color vision, OCT, autofluorescence, the test that will clinch our diagnosis would be the ERG. And if we do ERG, we can see OCT here is more or less normal with mild thickening of the photoreceptor layer. But ERG, you can see this is there is extinguished. The upper one is for the right eye and the lower one for the left eye. All the 6 phases. The last 2 phases, that is the for the cone photoreceptors, we can see that almost it is extinguished. This is diagnostic of rod monochromatism or achromatopsia. Why is it important to distinguish them from cone dystrophy? Because though the affection is severe, these individuals have nystagmus and photoaversion, but they are non-progressive. With time, they become better, and these individuals do very well with red tint glasses. 7-year-old male. Now, features suggestive of retinitis pigmentosa. You see, the arterial attenuation, diffuse RP mottling, but the boy's chief complaint was photoaversion from birth. So then what is the diagnosis? Is it cone dystrophy? Is it achromatopsia or Leber's congenital amaurosis? What to do? Which test next? Of course, if we do OCT, we can see that the photoreceptor layer is intact at the central macula, but they are lost at the periphery. Now, as per the objective finding, this should be a case like juvenile RP, but the symptoms are like cone dystrophy. Now, which test that can give us a final conclusion? Of course, ERG. If we do, we can see that both scotopic and photopic phases are extinguished, which is characteristic of usually juvenile RP, and the severe variant is Leber's congenital amaurosis. The point here is some of the Leber congenital amaurosis can also present with photoaversion in addition to extremely poor visual prognosis and difficulty at night. This is a case of penetrating trauma, 35-year-old male 7 years ago. There is a small mass, organized mass, just nasal to the optic disc. No one was sure what it was. So the ultrasound, we can see the reflectivity was not that high and was diagnosed as a case of pre-retinal granuloma, tuberculosis or something, not sure. But if we gather all the corroborative evidence that he had a 7 year ago, he had a injury with a sharp projectile, and there was a very small faint scar at the inferotemporal limbus, small iris atrophic patch. This was characteristic of, quite suggestive of an intraocular foreign body. Now the next thing to diagnose it, confirm our diagnosis, is ERG. As we can see here, this is a case of advanced siderosis, extinguished scotopic and photopic responses, and B wave is negative, as we can see here, and suggestive of a foreign body. Probably it was a case of encapsulated foreign body which was missed, and so this prevents us from investigating him extensively for pre-retinal granuloma. With this, we discussed how their ERG is helpful in his inner retinal ischemia. Stargardt maculopathy, as we can see here, bilaterally symmetrical flex, central atrophic patch, foveal thinning, as if the internal limiting membrane is kissing retinal pigment epithelium, foveal atrophy, nothing else but Stargardt macular dystrophy, almost diagnostic. ERG doesn't help much, give anything extra. But why ERG is needed? Let us go to the next case. We can see here the flex, bilaterally symmetrical atrophic patch, but here the photopic and scotopic responses were affected. And the usually Stargardt retinal macular dystrophy, the rate of progression is slower than the other classes of panretinal dystrophy. But the variant, those types of Stargardt macular dystrophy who show up affection of these photopic and scotopic responses right at the time of presentation, they are the one who are going to worsen faster and much more affected than their other counterparts of Stargardt dystrophy. So this is how ERG helps in distinguishing, giving a prognosis that which are the class of patient who are going to worsen with time. Egg yolk like material, bilaterally symmetrical, that shows bright hyperautofluorescence, is almost again spot diagnosis for best macular dystrophy. And ERG with a normal ERG and a flat EOG, as we can see here, there is no light rise. We discussed this is a dark phase and a light phase. Normally it should rise up like this. It is not going. So it's diagnostic of best disease. What extra EOG can give? Those who don't have any morphological changes like fundus looking normal, also in them, if EOG is abnormal, it can predict a carrier that the patient is probably carrying the gene but has not manifested yet. So this sometimes the things might not be as clear as we saw in the last case. We bilaterally symmetrical atrophic patch, which was diagnosed as a case of AMD, but 40-year-old. Somewhere it was diagnosed as a case of CSCR. But if you look at, have a closer look, there were hyperautofluorescence deposited along the border of a platyhelminth-like lesion. This is again suggestive of Best disease, and EOG, when we do, we see that the light rise is not there. Then the extreme variant, where you can see again 27-year-old male, where there are extensive coarse dull gray pigments at the posterior pole as well as along the arcade. 20/20 part vision, N6, diagnosed as a case of TB because the Mantoux was 34, hyperreactive Mantoux. There was no bit cells, and what was the diagnosis? If you should, as I said before, going for any other test, I usually do quick non-invasive test, and we can see brightly hyperautofluorescence material along the arcades and the posterior pole. So it is a vital line. Probably we are dealing with some form of bestrophinopathy, but Best disease usually have a different morphology. So what is it? Again, ERG, when we do, ERG shows grossly reduced scotopic responses with slightly reduced photopic responses here, both right and left eye. Usually, Best disease ERG remains normal. EOG, there is no light rise. Again, you can see here, there is a scotopic phase and light. There is no light rise at the photopic phase. It is almost flat. So ERG severely affected along with EOG affected is quite characteristic of something called as autosomal recessive bestrophinopathy, or ARB. And this is different from Best disease because usually many times gets misdiagnosed as case of some inflammatory disease, and EOG, ARG are both subnormal, autosomal recessive inheritance. Sometimes you see this, many times you see this intraretinal cystic spaces more common than the Best disease, and the course is usually good. 64-year-old female had a on hydroxychloroquine treatment for 2 years only. Usually we see maculopathy happening when they take more than 400 milligram for more than 5 years. But vision was good 2020, but HBF 10 days to showed central scotoma, huge depressed spot. What to do? Should we stop HCQ or not? We know that HCQ is an immunomodulator drug, though it is bad for eye, but systemically it is very well tolerated and very good side effect profile. So before telling them, the rheumatologist, to stop this drug, one should be damn sure that it is really true toxicity. So in those cases, a multifocal ERG helps. We can see that usually HCQ affect the waves from the 2 to 6 degree, and there is good waves from those areas. So even to get a better resolution, we used more number of hexagons, and we can see that there is good response from that. So what we did, we advised to repeat the test, and the next visit, the HBF came to be normal. So we continued the hydroxychloroquine. So that is how they helped us in confirming the early drug toxicity. Sometimes, suppose a surgery has been done, like post-macular hole surgery, you see that anatomically good macular vision is not par with, why not 2040 only. So when we did multifocal ERG, we can see that the the foveal peak is stunted. This can explain that the vision not being 2020, and sometimes can be useful in the research. This is the one again where multifocal ERG plays a crucial role. So this is this boy who was 8-year-old, vision 20/100, and everything else was normal. Almost you can see that ERG, VEP normal, diagnosed elsewhere is malingering, amblyopia, optic neuropathy, so on. Everything looks normal. So except maybe small focal defect here in the photoreceptor layer. So here we want to know some objective test targeted to every structure in the eye, like optic nerve, VEP, full field ERG. Then you have color vision, everything. Once we did, we want to know that whether, though structurally the cone photoreceptors are good here, do they function well? So that can be told by the multifocal ERG. And we see that this is the normal, and this is the right eye and left eye. The center shows stunted foveal peaks, and these stunted foveal peaks suggest that there is cone photoreceptor dysfunction from the center. This is something called as central foveal cone dysfunction. Here the entire cone system is not affected, only the foveal cones are affected, and the diagnosis is occult macular dystrophy. And this is again the elder brother also had a similar profile. So this helped us in fixing the diagnosis of occult macular dystrophy. This is my last case. This is a 19-year-old male, had head injury, no PLIs. Now this was again referred by a retina specialist who said that who did a VEP and said that he had some response. And why? He said that when PL is there is no light perception, why there is some response in the flash VEP. So what we discussed, that an extinguished VEP doesn't imply a flash VEP. flat VEP, flat response, because usually whatever you do, there is some electrical noise from the brain activity that shows off in the VEP tracing. So those tracing need to be reproducible. So when we rechecked, we found that the responses are not reproducible. So the response is not a meaningful response. And this is actually, usually there is no response and advanced optic atrophy, and there is no response and there is no role of any further intervention. This is a case. Oh, okay, one more. This is a case who had counting finger 1 meter distance in the right eye and 20/20 vision in the left eye. This went to the pediatric opthal clinic, and the disc was looking pale in the right eye, a bit pale. So was diagnosed as a case of optic neuropathy, and was about to go, but somehow it came for a follow-up. And during follow-up, what we could see is, you can see that OCT shows inner retinal thinning. So this is suggestive of probably arterial occlusion. And when we did ERG showed a electronegative B wave. So the VEP abnormality that we saw was secondary to a retinal pathology. So whenever we are interpreting a ERG VEP, it should be in conjunction with a objective test for the macula or retina. Otherwise, we might diagnose a panretinal pathology as a optic nerve pathology. So the lesson from here is that this is actually central retinal old central CRAO, which affected the ERG as well as VEP. And in the VEP, because we did not do ERG in the first sitting itself, we misdiagnosed this as a case of. So I end with this case, and just to revise which test to order when, it depends upon the question that is generated after going through the history in detail, clinical examination, quick non-invasive tests like RAPD, color vision, autofluorescence, Amsler, fundus photo. Finally, narrow down your questions and advise those electrodiagnostic tests as per the questions we are going to answer. So thank you all. I again share the references that I have and further source of reading. Thanks for the opportunity. Again, I congratulate you all for the new electrodiagnostic setup there, and wish you all the best. And we will be happy to, in case you need any assistance from us at any point of time.
Thank you so much, sir. To conclude, I request Dr. Rashi ma'am to please deliver the vote of thanks.
Thank you so much, Abhishek. First of all, I would like to thank our distinguished speakers, and especially a word for Dr. Tapas, who had readily agreed, in spite of his very busy schedule, to speak for our special webinar which we have conducted. Also, a lot of thanks to Mr. Sujoy, and also to our very own Agniv. I also would like to thank our chief guest, Mr. MP Singh, our director and our trustee, who had spared time, and the man behind the scenes, that is Sameer Sutar, who has helped us put this whole show together. A special thanks to Sameer. The ISD team, so like to thank all our administrators and our optometrists and our dear Dr. Amishi, who has agreed to MC the whole program. And last but not the least, our delegates. Thank you all once again. And thanks again, Dr. Tapas, for sparing your valuable time. And our other speakers, Mr. Sujoy and Agniv also. Thank you so much.